Good morning. It is a pleasure to be joining you all today. Well done to the organisers and sponsors for pulling the program together remotely and allowing us all to remain connected and keep learning from each other and sharing challenges and lessons. I'm joining you today from my home in the beautiful Blue Mountains, and I'd like to acknowledge the Darug and Gundungurra people who are the traditional custodians of this land, and I would like to pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging. While so many of you have had to adjust recently to working remotely, I am fortunate that I've been doing my job as CEO for Economic Development Australia from the Blue Mountains for almost 3 years now. If I'm not travelling the country spending time with members and our state committees or other stakeholders, I'm here. So in that way, we've been fortunate as EDA's operations really haven't been disrupted at all. And that has meant that EDA has been able to really ramp up its service delivery throughout the twin disasters of the bushfires and COVID-19. As the fires were burning in late 2019, EDA, as the national peak body for economic development, moved quickly to develop an online recovery and resilience hub, which provides a range of disaster recovery tools and guides from Australia and overseas. EDA also developed a range of programs originally intended to be delivered on the ground in bushfire affected areas, but are of course now able to be delivered remotely to support economic development teams as they start to prepare to rebuild local economies. We also produced a series of economic recovery themed webinars with global experts and leading Australian practitioners that support economic development professionals responsible for recovery following any kind of disaster or crisis. EDA has a database of recovery and resilience experts ready to assist with training, recovery, program development and mentoring. And I know that many of you working in local and state planning and economic development are juggling a range of pressures, both internally and externally, having to respond nimbly with what might be a diminishing revenue base. So the takeaway there is that Economic Development Australia is here, ready to assist local economic development teams across the country as they respond to the challenges that we all face. EDA offers such a broad range of resources to help local governments set up a plan of action to be a resilient community, to respond more effectively to the economic aspects of disasters, and to lead economic recovery efforts by helping local businesses respond to impacts. And one of the things at EDA that we really strive to do is empower economic development professionals to be strategic so that when economic recovery initiatives are required, they are in the context of local communities' economic landscape rather than reactionary. And what does the challenge look like at the moment? How do we measure the impact of such catastrophic bushfires as well as the COVID-19 pandemic? Well, as you would know, there's a lot of data and analysis around at the moment, and I don't intend to delve too much into that today. But SGS released a really good paper recently in the last week or so, which describes the economic decline associated with both the fires and COVID as the most significant challenge to Australia's economy since the Second World War. Most of the data is telling us that Australia's GDP is expected to decline by around 6.7% in 2019 and 20. And the SGS report also provides some really good detail around that, which shows what the various stimulus, what the decline would have been without the various stimulus measures that we've seen. Without those, Australia's GDP would likely decline by over 14%. But of course, we know that GDP is not declining at the same rate across the country. In fact, some regions with significant mining and agricultural industries that escaped the bushfire disaster and have perhaps been less impacted by social distancing restrictions have in fact experienced some levels of GDP growth. So some levels of local government areas have experienced between a 2.5% and a 7.5% decline. LGAs that rely on tourism are, of course, likely to experience between 11 and 15% decline as a result of the travel restrictions. And those LGAs heavily impacted by the summer bushfires as well as COVID could see up to a 20% decline. And of course, all of this is happening on the back of a lengthy drought, and neither that nor COVID is over yet. So when we are continuously hearing these statistics and the term unparalleled is consistently being used, it can all feel a bit daunting for local governments looking to lead economic development within their limited budgets. And I know for some, it's tempting to pop in the too hard basket and claim that economic recovery is the remit of state and federal government as well as industry. But in fact, nothing could be further from the truth. Economic development is, as many of you would know, all about stimulating employment opportunities in order to improve the community. And this is best done by using and capitalising on the resources that exist in the community. And so, of course, this is the argument that we use at EDA when illustrating why local government has such an important role to play in economic development. Good economic development is all about capitalising on your regional advantages, building on the strengths, and then drawing on those core attributes to grow and diversify your economy. And if that's the secret to stimulating a local economy, then who better than local government to be a facilitator of that? A good local government has its ear to the ground. It knows where its community has come from and what its community looks like now, what its community's aspirations are. A tuned-in local government knows what is done well within its community. It knows its strengths, and then a skilled, collaborative economic development team can facilitate growth and diversification from that point. And of course, the same rules apply for local economic recovery. If you are a good economic development professional, then you should be in a position to state that nobody knows your community better than you. Economic development professionals are so often the glue between the business community and the greater economic interest in the communities in which they serve. So when a disaster hits, it's local economic development professionals that are often the ones on the front line. They are more often than not the primary contact between business and government. So what are the key initiatives that local government can implement to lead economic recovery, and how can we build resilience? Well, in the first instance, the best piece of advice that I would give any economic development professional is to make sure you are at the table with the key decision makers, or at the very least, if your organisation's structure precludes that from happening, that economic recovery is on the agenda right from the beginning. So in 2013, I was Chief Executive Officer of an economic development agency here in the Blue Mountains. Not long after we launched that organisation, we experienced a large bushfire disaster, which at the time represented the largest loss of homes associated with a bushfire ever in New South Wales. So one of the things that we advocated for at that time was that either myself or the chair should be at the table with key agencies. So that's with the police force, the defence force, council, the ex-fire commissioner who was seconded to lead community recovery. Economic recovery needs to be hand in glove with the physical infrastructure and the psychosocial recovery strategies that are developed in those early days. One of the lessons that we learned in that crisis was the wonderful Red Cross volunteers who go in to speak with fire-affected families immediately after the fire were not capturing whether or not the family ran a business in the home. So not gathering that data firsthand in the first instance made it quite difficult then to follow up and connect them with the business support that they were entitled to. You really don't want staff going in after the fact, asking questions again. You know, these families are traumatized. We also found that later on, they were actually reluctant to admit to running a business in the home in case they hadn't had the correct permits or it affected their insurance claims. Now, they were all unfounded concerns, but reasonable in a traumatic situation. And that kind of data loss makes it really difficult to play that very important role of bridge builder. So it was a lost opportunity. And from that, we were able to advocate that for future incidents, that question is always included right from the get-go. So asking the right questions so you can deploy the help quickly and with minimal fuss. Also, and we say this all the time at EDA, data is your best friend. Being able to, as quickly as possible, do some modelling so you can articulate the impact of the disaster on your community. We have, of course, lots of high-level indicator data for COVID. I went through some of it earlier, but what does COVID mean for your community? Now, as local government practitioners, you have many options with great companies like Remplan and ID, and there are others. But economic development teams should be able to give their mayor or general manager a sheet with 4 to 5 points, which really illustrate the direct impact to whatever's driving your economy, your local tourism sector, or the retail sector, or is it agriculture, for example? And then what the flow and impact to that represents for your community. Put it in plain language and then get everyone using that same story to advocate to state and federal government for support for your region. As with all economic development planning, the data should underpin your decision making. In addition to crunching the numbers, economic development professionals should, as always, be listening to their local businesses. Really dive deeply into how your industry sectors are being impacted and ensure that your planning is being done in collaboration with them. So let's talk about the immediate response phase. How are your economic development activities helping businesses move from shock to survive? We have a series of webinars, as I mentioned, on the EDA website, which present many case studies and guidelines around the key economic recovery tools that can be deployed in the aftermath of a disaster or an economic shock. So I really encourage you to check those out. In response to COVID, many councils have established a triage service to provide practical support to help businesses deal with tax flow, cash flow, insurance issues, etc. The Sunshine Coast, for example, provided an hour of professional advice, so funded that for businesses to help them navigate the massive amount of information that's out there, connecting them with the key support services, accounting, financial advice, legal, or HR. Other quick response initiatives have included local governments setting up business directories to help local businesses stay visible as they pivot to online or takeaway service delivery. We've seen many councils helping businesses stay open by waiving licence fees for things like outdoor dining or food stalls, and rent relief is, of course, a great tool that councils can deploy to assist businesses operating in their premises. Some councils have released quick response business grants for amounts anywhere from $2,000 to $100,000, and we've seen loads of fantastic buy local campaigns and some great changes to procurement policies, which in our view should be standard practice into the future. Things like councils paying invoices within 7 days are really important measures which can make a huge difference to small local businesses. The rule of thumb for local government right now should really be, if it gets money flowing through the local economy, can we please say yes? And I would also say the difference between good and great economic response by economic development professionals in this first crisis response period is their ability to listen. The scale of the impact associated with COVID is truly unique, but in a more, let's say, traditional disaster like a bushfire, what is so important for economic development professionals to remember is that they are generally working with people who are by and large traumatised. People are feeling that they have lost control, livelihoods are at stake, workforce issues will be front of mind, family issues could be playing a part in their response. And all of the most experienced business recovery specialists that I've worked with who have helped fire affected or drought affected or cyclone damaged businesses get back on their feet is to remember that it will often take until the third meeting to really get a sense of just how much damage there is and what shape that business is actually in. And those working in regional areas always recommend including family members, wives or husbands in the discussion to get a true picture of what is really happening on the ground. So after that initial phase, once the bleeding is stemmed, so to speak, we need to move from the immediate response phase to recovery phase. And the priority for the recovery phase is, of course, about getting businesses trading again and getting money circulating in your local economy. And this is where local councils should be thinking about how they can expedite the strategic plan. Often, economic development professionals can feel as though responding to a disaster is a separate thing to their usual job. Where's the template for disaster recovery? What pathway are we supposed to follow? Where in fact, it can sometimes just present opportunities to bring into being what you know will create wealth, jobs, and well-being in your community. So disasters really do illuminate the importance of a strong strategic plan, one that is, of course, underpinned with good quality data, authentic industry and community consultation, and a fair bit of ambition thrown in. And this should be your recovery template. Back your strategic plan. Of course, we have to be ready to make changes in response to the situation at any given time, but there's no need to throw the baby out with the bathwater. So there's a fair bit of resourcing available for this. Grant Guru is informing us that the pool of grants is increasing all the time. One of our EDA presenters, Michael Campbell from Lucid Economics, talks about this during a recent EDA webinar. Councils should be, wherever possible, expediting their capital projects. It's those key industry development initiatives and those large maintenance projects. If they're on the books, bring them forward. At the very least, use this time to get the tender documents ready. Be ready to help businesses get back on track. Do the work now that's required to get the planning projects shovel ready. This is the time that council should be, of course, considering deferring DA fees to help get infrastructure projects happening. Get that building site fired up as soon as possible. The economic impact of facilitation and fast tracking will far outweigh the deferred fees. And if you need to convince anybody higher up the food chain of that, then use your REM plan or your IDs to help you do that, so you can quantify the benefit to acting now. The underpinning question should be, what levers do you as council have to deploy which will incentivise businesses to open up as soon as possible? Now, you're probably seeing businesses closing on your main street. You need to be investigating with the real estate agents who's looking at the space. Be ready to support these businesses that perhaps want to get in that space to get them up and running as soon as possible. Have your ear to the ground and find out which shops are close to leaving, who's about to up sticks. Do everything in your power, and dare I suggest what might feel outside of your power, to prevent shops remaining empty when restrictions are lifted. Don't be confined by the usual rules. Now from there, it's looking ahead to see how you build competitiveness back into your economy. So all of these kind of triage response initiatives that I've talked about today will really be important to bring your baseline economy back online. But the really important strategic work is firing up those more complex parts of your economy. So for economic recovery, the question is, how do we get strength back into the economy in a changed environment? How do we move into what some are coining the thrive stage? And this is where, of course, it becomes a little bit more of a marathon than a sprint. And of course, we don't know what the future will look like. There's a lot of great research happening around this and some really good thinking coming out of the sector. Our own EDA chair, Jason McFarlane, recently wrote a paper with some interesting thoughts around this in relation to COVID, and EDA will be leading national discussions on this issue as things evolve. But we've seen major state, national and international supply chains completely disrupted, and we don't know if they'll return to how they were. So economic development professionals should be looking for the opportunities and facilitating trade within and between local economies. There could be the opportunity to develop alternative marketplaces that provide goods and services to newly localised markets that just weren't there in the pre-COVID environment. The disruption to supply chains may mean that local goods and services are now viable as substitute imports. They're representing opportunities for local enterprise. So economic development professionals should be deliberately harnessing these opportunities, helping industry drill into their supply chains to discover where local suppliers could solve some of the bottlenecks which are occurring. Now, anyone that knows me knows that I am forever championing the importance of clustering and collaboration. The disrupted environment due to COVID provides the ideal context for businesses to identify shared goals and look at ways that combining resources can get them all where they need to be. Can we facilitate new partnerships? How can we accelerate this transformation so that opportunities aren't lost? This is highly important when we consider the benefits of sharing workforce so as to keep people employed across a range of businesses. At a more macro level, one of the most important roles for local governments, and one that EDA will certainly remain focused on, is ensuring that the ongoing stimulus benefits our communities. So we've seen a range of generous stimulus packages designed to deal with the shock that was inevitable with the necessary shutdowns. And as this shock is managed, there will be a need for further initiatives focusing on waking up economies from their hibernation. Local champions and decision makers need to be prepared with programs of investable initiatives that are targeted to the needs and priorities of their local economies. Let's not have a generic response where every school gets a new canteen or similar initiative. Regions and cities should be ready with transformative proposals. I would strongly urge local governments to empower their economic development teams to liaise closely with local stakeholders to develop a clear understanding of priorities. What are the catalyst projects that may underpin new economic activity? Get data to back up your rationale and develop quality pitch documents that articulate what the initiatives mean for your community. Identify regional and cross-regional partners with common agendas and develop joint advocacy programs that promote joint opportunities and impacts. Whatever you do, don't be competing for a theatre against your neighbouring LGA. So in summary, after a catastrophic event, local governments and economic development professionals are very much essential to the local community recovery. Disasters illuminate the importance of a strong economic development strategy. Ideally, when disaster hits, the economic development team are prepared to ramp things up to a high gear, to triage, respond, and lead recovery hand in glove with business. We remind you that EDA is here to support those very important endeavours, connect you with colleagues dealing with similar challenges, and advocate for you to ensure that your work is recognised and resourced well. Thank you so much for having me today. Enjoy the rest of the conference. Stay in touch and stay well.